Hello, how are you all? It's Tuesday. I can't believe it is July. Where is the first half of the year gone? I'm really excited to be back, joined by the lovely Jo Major. And you can see we have a guest today, as usual, on Can Recruitment Crack Inequality. This is the conversation or the question that we pose, I don't know, every month, every 6 weeks. Obviously, Jo and I strongly believe that recruitment can crack inequality, especially within the D&I space, and the role that we play within the recruitment industry to ensuring that everyone has accessible, equitable and inclusive processes. Today, we're talking about a nuance within a talent management or a talent attraction strategy, which is essentially your employee value proposition, or as we like to call in the know, at the EVP. And understanding how crucial it becomes, and not just as a kind of strategic asset, but also distinguishing your brand from others. So we are joined by an incredible specialist who I'm going to ask Jo to introduce in a minute, who's really going to take us on that journey. I think, I've worked in an internal talent acquisition role. I support lots of organisation, talent acquisition teams. Their role is becoming more demanding to be able to attract talent. And also to ensure, like I said, that we are, practicing truly inclusive processes. I think it's a conversation that we wanted to bring to the masses today to, as always, impart a bit of knowledge, promote, to ignite some discussion. Hopefully you're going to get a lot out of it. So, the lovely Jo, it's been an age since we saw it. Well, last time we saw each other was in person, wasn't it? In London, which was a joy.
Yeah, it was a treat.
It was a treat. How have you been?
I'm good. All good. Lots of exciting stuff going on at Diversity and Recruitment Headquarters, HQ.
Love it.
Just looking at just how I can make what I do even better. So I'm going to be launching a new product soon. I'm always launching new products, right? But no, I've redesigned, repositioned my 6-step program. So watch this space. I am genuinely really excited about this conversation, and I actually think other people are as well. I mean, everything we talk about is cool, right? But this is a topic that I have been talking about probably for the last year or so. And it all kind of stemmed from, I was working with employers and recruitment businesses that were doing some really, really cool stuff around the employee experience and all the goodies that were on offer, once people step through the door and sign the contract. And I was just like, aren't we missing a real trick here in actually how we build this into the marketing of the roles when we take them out to market? Why should people find out about what we do and what their experience of us will be once they sign on the dotted line and receive all the information about what their experience is gonna look like? So then I started kind of learning and reading more about the EVP piece and actually looking at who was doing it really well. And I found that there was loads of the bigger organizations, the enterprises, the big sexy brands that have got huge marketing departments really feeding resources into this stuff. And I'm like, why should it just be those folks that are doing this? Why can't every single candidate know exactly what it is they're stepping into once they decide to participate in the recruitment process, right? Then I was lucky enough for my path to cross with the brilliant Charu, who we have as a guest today. And, this is all about surrounding ourselves with people who know more than we do, right? And Charu is definitely, for me, that person. I think before we even started hanging out and having conversations, I was already following your content, which is brilliant on LinkedIn. And I just loved the perspective that I got from somebody who was really leading the work when it came to employer brands, the employee value proposition, the employee experience, the marketing, the comms, and all of that stuff that built up this beautiful kind of TA piece. And I've just, I'm really excited, and it's lovely to have a little furry friend in the background. I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for mine to start kicking off, but so this is, I guess, what I find when I speak to my clients is, where do we start? What do we put in? How can this help us? Who should have it? When should we introduce it? And that's why I guess we decided to have this initial conversation with Charu, who seems to be
no, I'm here.
She's probably sorting
the dog. I love it.
They always know when to make an appearance.
She's not a barky dog at all, and suddenly Scout is like all over. I want to be part of this show, obviously.
I love it. I love it. Well, we will pass over to you, Charu. I would like to say we've had someone who's commented to say, hi, team, really looking forward to this one. I should say, and fail every single time I come on and introduce this segment, that please use this as an opportunity to connect, to ask us questions. You know, we want this to be interactive. And if you ask a question, I'm sure someone else is thinking it as well. And you can get some, real, tangible advice from Charu, who's going to take us on this journey. So yeah, get involved. So sorry, Joe, back over to you to intro Charu. Or to pass over to Charu.
Everything kind of like froze on my side. I thought I'd already done it, but then I think I was frozen. I was a bit behind. But once again, I am honoured genuinely to introduce a powerhouse behind recruitment marketing, Charu Malhotra. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, first of all, I echo what Sally and Joe just said, that, if you've got questions, we all want to hear them. This is hopefully going to be a really interesting conversation. And if we can't answer them in this call, we can answer them afterwards. And certainly from a LinkedIn perspective, that's what we're all there for. And echo what Joe said. Genuinely, I love talking to you both about this. We are really invested in trying to change the dialogue around inclusion. And, I firmly believe that TA and talent, anyone in the talent space has got so much power to help organizations both change the dynamic, but realize the dynamic around creating inclusive cultures, inclusive environments. So, really happy to have this conversation. I don't think I am somebody that is doing it brilliantly. I have a lot of energy for this. I do this in all the spaces I have, and I bring to the table a perspective. But I also want to say that there'll be a lot of people perhaps who are also doing this as well, and everyone's got a different perspective. So what I'll be sharing is my experience of doing this 7 times in lots of different global companies, but also as someone that often is the only brown person in the room, or the only brown woman in the room. Sometimes it's really good to have that personal perspective too. So yeah, let's go.
Fantastic. Well, let's kick off then. So I think let's kind of take this to basics. And what is the difference between your employer brand and your EVP? So, your employee value proposition. And so what's the difference between them? And also, how do they connect to one another?
Yeah, sure. So from an employee value proposition perspective, and I do think as an industry, we can jargonize so much. Ultimately, what are we talking about? It's that the give and the get. What am I going to get once I become an employee of your organization, big or small? And what are you as the company and the brand and the organization going to give me? It's the give and the get. And the EVP is that, I think, articulation of what the company wants to be known for, what the company believes in, both from a mission and a values perspective, the behaviors that it tolerates and allows you to thrive at an organization. And some companies have really codified those behaviors. Some have codified them, but actually don't live and breathe them. So the EVP, I think, is that it's a real manifestation, articulation of what does it mean to work for this organization. And it's more often than not built and should be built inside out. So what do I mean by that? And again, a lot of people will look at this and think, because it's all about external attraction. It's what do we want to be famous for? What do we want to say about ourselves? What are our competitors doing? And that's where that's where the articulation comes from. Actually, the companies that do this well is starting inside out. What is the reality? And talking to individuals across different groups, so that actually that reality and that real lived experience of what does it mean to work here is past that EVP. So it's not a hashtag, it's not a tagline, it's that articulation. And often the employer brand is confused. So I'm glad you asked the question. The employer brand is how we intentionally communicate what it's like to work here. So the EVP and you know can be a manifestation. It could be a sort of paragraph of this is what it means to work here, with pillars and lots of different stories underneath it. But the employer brand is that intentional communication, that intentional messaging, the content that you see on YouTube, on LinkedIn, the content that's on the website, the careers pages, the content and the communications on an ATS, how you decline someone, how you invite someone for interview, the content in your onboarding, that's your employer brand. And that intentionality is what's powerful. It's not a campaign. It can be a campaign, but a campaign is a component of your employer brand. But the employer brand is that heartbeat, that regular, consistent cadence of good communication.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it? It really is. And why is it so important that your EVP truly reflects the core of what makes your company a great place to work?
Yeah, so I think the employee value proposition and then the underlying employer branding messaging that we just talked about is paramount, because we've all been environments, we've all experienced environments where the outside can feel shiny, or it can feel like something you've really bought into. And like you put your best face on when you're going for an interview, often the leaders you'll meet will tell you that the best of everything. You join, and actually it's not that. And if you haven't actually understood that before you join, this is where disengagement comes in. This is where attrition in that first 12 months comes in. So it's paramount, because nobody wants high attrition, nobody wants a disengaged employee. And then, moving jobs is so key. But also a great EVP, if it's anchored in reality with some aspiration, because again, it should reflect where you want to go in 2 years, 3 years time. Actually, how are you going to really switch off as well as switch on the candidates? And by that, and this is a mantra I've lived by for the last 12 years, brilliant EVPs and really magnetic employer brands are polarizing, they're distinctive. And by that, I mean, if I can share as much content as possible to you and Joe on my website, via my channels that we're using for employer branding, via the types of messaging that leaders and employees use in advocacy, I can also then tell where perhaps our values don't align, and therefore I won't apply. So it's really key for those reasons that if you can describe what you're like in a way that's accurate, I'm not going to apply because I already realize this isn't the environment for me, and therefore I'm not wasting my time and the TA team's time, or I'm not even going into a position where I'm being part of the process. So that's why, I think it's really important to be bold and understand what you are and what you aren't, and communicate that.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And Joe, me and you have talked about this a number of times in terms of where do you then get that balance? And maybe, Joe, I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot here, but maybe this is a question for you, and obviously I've got my opinions on it, in terms of if you've got a D&I team, and so you're on this D&I journey, okay, and you want to be appealing to be an inclusive employer, okay, but actually the harsh reality of where your company currently is in terms of that journey. So let's use flex working as an example, okay? It's a contentious subject for a number of reasons. It excludes lots of different groups of individuals from the workplace. Where does it stand in terms of portraying that you are, I'm not asking a question, I'm babbling. Do you portray where you are on that journey? Your aspirations are to be, because it's like this kind of chipping an egg situation. I don't know, Joe, if you've kind of got any examples of that.
I think going back to what Chari said, I think that it's about this transparency piece, isn't it? It's like, really, how do we position ourselves to have a really, really honest conversation with our external market, in this context, candidates, about who we actually are right now, and who we aspire to be, kind of in the future, and but even having that conversation and being really mindful about how that message could screen in, but how it could screen out. You know, I think you switch on and switch off is the language that you use, Charu. I really like that. I say screen in, screen out. Yours sounds much better.
Yeah.
But really understanding, if we are going to be fully transparent on this, like, how does that impact also the conversation that we're having over here around our commitment to ED&I? And I personally feel like publicly acknowledging that is the best policy, right? Right now, for example, we do not have flexible and hybrid working. We recognize the impact that could have on how many of you may want to work for our business. For us, these are, I mean, this might be going a step too far. In my opinion, you can never go too far with transparency and honesty. These are the reasons why right now, why we feel this is why we're having to navigate this and we're having internal conversations. It's taking us a bit longer to get there, but we are earning the fact that we don't currently offer that. And that could be the reason why you don't come and work for us, okay? But we want to be better and we want to do this. And I think, you know, there's no point in polishing the turd, right? Because everyone then coming into your recruitment and hiring process or getting the job with your business is going to figure out very, very quickly what you've done. So I think when it comes to what it's actually like to work for your organization, this being really, really honest about it and earning the impact of that on your diversity and inclusion efforts. I'm waffling now, but does that make sense?
No, I think so. Yeah, I mean, Charu, what are your views?
So I think it's very much appealing to candidates who will want that honesty, but also going back to that whole, why are you doing the employer brand messaging? It's to have the right people apply for your role, but also to share as much as you can behind the curtain as possible. Now, you can't share 100%. So, you know, like with anything though, you know, we use flexible working as an example, but you know, you can use so many different examples where you are now and where you want to be, describing that, you know, working out loud and sharing it is what candidates want to see. Therefore, I can decide, okay, I don't want to work in the office 5 days a week, but actually I'll keep an eye on this business because the values suit me, the people I've seen on their career site, on their LinkedIn or at an event are impressive. And therefore I'll be part of the talent community. So I think it's that showing where you are, but genuinely, and you see this playing out where there's, you know, the last 12 months has been a real trend of putting on people's adverts. You know, if you don't have all the criteria on this job advert, still apply. And I think it's been not for the last couple of years. And the intention behind it is a really positive one. I've been part of those teams where I've really banged that drum to say we should put that on. We're now in an environment where, you know, talent acquisition teams are leaner. They're overwhelmed with applications. You've got, you know, 74 applications within about 20 minutes of an ad. I saw yesterday a TA leadership ad. And actually that isn't true anymore. And I'm not saying this is the right thing or not. As someone looking for a job, I don't think it is. But, you know, if the person doesn't meet 90% of the criteria, they are going to be either rejected or they're going to be in that pool that doesn't get looked at all. So something that was written for the best intentions, for the reasons that Joe said, we want to be transparent. We want to say we're doing things differently. Therefore, we're trying to open up from an I&D perspective, the type of talent. We've left on there because it's, you know, a really positive thing, but it doesn't match the reality. In the same way, flexible working, we've all seen organizations make some colossal U-turns on this. And yet their websites and their kind of collateral still talks about agile or hybrid working. So it's that whole keeping up with where you are and showing behind the curtain the real reality versus what it was last year, was only going to win you fans and win you the hearts and minds of people that go, do you know what, at least you're being honest, this isn't for me.
I think you're right. And I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, I spend, you know, in my role, I recruit diversity and inclusion leaders, you know, practitioners across, you know, multiple industries. And I spend a huge proportion of my time talking to individuals who are on the job market. And it's astonishing. I think you're right, Charu, the impact this is then having. And I don't think necessarily just putting that on the jobs, on the advert, is having this impact, but I think it's definitely contributing towards it, is that I'm meeting people who are excellent at what they do. Like, genuinely, if I could get these individuals in front of my client, wow, you know, they're up there in terms of quality. They're applying for 60, 80 jobs and not getting one response. And so if we're talking about how organizations are investing and should absolutely be investing in EVP and their employee brand, it can be very quickly unraveled in terms of the experience. And one of the, quite a lot of people, or a proportion of people, work in the talent space before they go into D&I, and that's their kind of route in, if you like. And I spoke to a senior person last week who said it's really made me, being on the other side of the coin, really made me, number one, question who I do and don't want to work for, but also think about how I can use this experience to enhance the candidate's experience moving forward when I do secure my next role. So I think we're dancing on a very fine line, aren't we, in terms of these kind of push and pulls, the select, deselect, I don't know what the acronym you used, the term you used, Joe, but I think it is, it's the impact that this can have, not just in terms of the roles you're currently trying to recruit for, but that attraction moving forward. It's really, really important.
I was going to say, I think candidates will forgive us if we, I think candidates will forgive us for not necessarily ticking all of those boxes when it comes to being able to access work in a way that works for us, if we don't waste their time. And I think, there's a lot of disengagement because people are exhausted with their job search, because they get so far down a process and they actually realize I can't make this work for me, whether it's, the working hours, the environment, whatever it might be. So I think maybe EVPs are fluid. Maybe we tailor them in response to the needs of the business and the reality of the candidate market, right now. And we reserve the right to change that when things evolve within our own organization and in our industries. I'd much rather somebody were just like, right now, we just can't do this. We can't make this work for everybody. But we're going to tell you now, rather than you go through, take your time. And don't forget that emotional investment of applying for a job, especially if it's something that you're like, this is my dream job. And then you never hear back, and it's the rejection, and layer that up and it becomes multiple rejections, and it starts to really impact our self-esteem, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. Cherry, back to you. What goes into our EVP?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. But to what you just said there, Joe, our EVPs are, should be agile. So I think it's that whole, mirroring the reality. But an organisation also needs to feel and be bold. And this is where you do see a sea of sameness, Sally. So what goes into an EVP is like ingredients in when you're making a dish or a cake or whatever, but it's how you then show those up, how much of something extra you put in there. And I think this is where you do see a sea of sameness, because everyone's like, okay, agile working is really important now, so we'll talk about that. Or actually, this is really important, so we'll talk about that. But actually, if it doesn't match the reality of what it's like to work in my business or what's important to us, and we're just doing it to put lipstick on a pig, this is where it falls down. And I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago, and I got a question. It was house building conference, and I got a question from someone that said, we're not. I went into the company, we're not diverse at all. We want to be, but we're not, and it's really, really hard. But shall we just talk about it anyway? And I was like, no, don't talk about something that actually isn't matched to reality. Talk about what you're planning on doing and what your roadmap looks like, but don't just say it because you see everyone else doing it. And that's when you descend to the sea of sameness, and this sort of bland that of everyone looking the same, which comes back to what's in an EVP. It's that whole behaviors. The culture, what is it like to work here? What are the behaviors we tolerate? What are the behaviors and values that are important to us as an organization? What are the things that are unwritten? And it's like you work in a company, and actually those first 6 months are spent almost deciphering what is the secret code, what's the secret sauce that isn't in a onboarding portal, and it's not part of the induction, but actually it's something that the buddy that you're given, and I'm a big fan of having a buddy when you first join, says, well, this is what it's like here. I'll give an example. I worked at Fodero. At nowhere through the 6 interviews I had was this ever said, but it was a culture of having a meeting before the meeting. And if anyone ever offered you said, do you want to meet for a coffee? You always said yes, because it was code for, I need to tell you something important about before that big meeting. So it's the EVP is the unsaid and the said. It's the culture, it's the values, the behaviors. It's also the hygiene factors. So I'm a big fan, and we've said, can recruitment crack inequality is putting salaries on job adverts. A VP, a leader, a manager, an executive not having a job advert and having this a salary and having a laundry list. How is that important? From an equality perspective, it's crucial. It's going to make me decide to apply or not. So an EVP has those kind of ingredients around the hygiene factors. Where am I going to work? How am I going to work? What's my leader like? So what is the style here? And this is where you can't have a one-size-fits-all EVP, because Sally and Joe, you might be doing similar roles in the D&I space. You're both advocates for D&I, you're big sponsors for it. But I bet the people that work for you, with you, around you, will describe your styles differently. So actually a big proponent of the EVP, the micro EVP, is what is it like to work in that office? What is it like to work in marketing versus working in a factory, work at shop floor? So huge amount of ingredients that go into what is it like to work for this company, and how can I communicate this enough that's behind the curtain so I can make my mind up about even applying or even then taking the job.
I think that's such an interesting point. And before you kind of got to that point, I was thinking about back to a company that I'd worked with and worked for. And I was actually part of the EVP team in terms of, having a kind of inclusion lens on it. And I think what's quite interesting, because I'd worked in various different roles within that organisation, I've been there for a long, long time. Actually, what I would describe the EVP at a kind of recruiter level, right, I think is very different to what, and rightly so, the kind of holistic teams, the group support teams are trying to push forward. And it kind of goes back to this kind of chicken and egg scenario that I was talking about earlier, because I think what would then happen potentially is people would come into the organisation having said, these are our values, this is what we stand for, this is how committed we are to certain causes, etc. But actually then going and work on specific teams who had very, very strong microcultures, very strong. Some would argue stronger than the overarching culture. That's when I think then the disparity comes. So I think as a recruiter, as an internal recruitment person, you are selling or attracting, or you believe in the things that you're talking about, but actually that can be quite different then from the reality. And I just wonder, that very clearly has an impact in retention within kind of 12 months. But I wonder how when you're marketing out a micro EVP, how can you effectively do that?
I think this is where I sort of start the call. TA are so powerful. We can infuse the culture so effectively by working with the business, but also, being part of, who gets shortlisted. How do you talk to the hiring managers? How do you, really support and partner with, versus being quite subservient? This is the shortlist, you decide who you want to interview. And I know Joe and Sally, you both talk about this a lot around the power of the intake meetings, the power of talking about individuals differently. And that's, that's a skill, that's an art. And I'm a massive believer in those intake meetings and partnering with a hiring manager on different steps through the process, so he or she feels part of the process. My first in-house job, it's, recruitment is a team sport, is what I learned at BP, and it's still a mantra, right? So there's microcultures. I've recruited for digital talent in a big global organization that wasn't famous for digital talent. It was relatively easy because I made sure that I really had a massively strong alliance and relationship with the digital leaders and the digital hiring managers, and also with the digital recruiting lead, so that we weren't saying something that was hugely at odds, because the macro EVP, the larger employer brand, can often feel like quite big, I use the word macro on purpose, big buckets, big bets, and not bland bets, but actually big bucket items that actually the things underneath, I'll use digital as an example, you can talk about in a micro way. So I'll use this as an example. Often the dress code could have been, slightly more flexible. Definitely the way that people were working in terms of hours and so on, the environment they worked in. But crucially, going back to the hygiene factor, we really over-indexed on the type of learning experiences, because from a microculture perspective, this was really key to that talent, both internally. So I learned that from the focus group of doing the microculture, but externally, anyone that recruits tech talent can tell you actually the technology I'm learning, what certificates I'm going to get, where am I going to go, how am I going to grow, how up to date is it, is of key importance. So you ladder that right at the top when you're talking about it. So it's easy if you do, your job from a recruitment perspective in the way that you should be doing. And I'm not saying that's easy, because sometimes businesses go, I haven't got time to talk to you. But actually, this goes back to that whole mantra of a recruitment as a team sport. I'm not just there to fill your requisition. If you want to have more women, if you want to have social mobility being a key part of your ED&I, if you want to have certain aspects of this type of individual come into your shortlist, we're going to have to work harder together to message this. So it's not at odds. It's not contradictory, Sally, but it's part of it. But it's being much more focused, and it's more about recruitment marketing versus saying that EVP doesn't exist, but actually this is what we're going to talk about that's important to this type of talent.
That's fascinating, isn't it? And I think, by doing that, going back to the original points you're making, you start attracting the right people. It's like it's that magnet, isn't it? Sorry, Jo, you carry on.
No, I was going to say, and most importantly, you retain them. And I'm just kind of like really reflecting on what's been said just now, and I'm thinking about this almost like adds another layer to your role as a recruiter, especially if you're an external recruiter. And maybe something that I didn't always think about. I kind of like looked at the macro culture that I was hiring into. What does this organization say across the board that it does? What is its vibe? What is its culture? What are its benefits and all of that, stuff, the ecosystem that surrounds the employee. What I didn't always really, really drill down on is what about this micro culture that this hiring manager is created for themselves. So I used to recruit for the business, when really, if I'm looking at retention, I should have really been recruiting for the hiring manager. If we're thinking about the employee experience and value proposition, there's extra layers, there's a bigger conversation to have. And I talk about this in the context usually when I'm training recruiters on identifying culture fit over social fit. What is it? What is that hiring manager's behaviors? How did they describe themselves as a manager? How do they manage? What are the team dynamics underneath that manager? How does that manager assess success? How do they onboard? How do they contribute to the learning and development? The company could be saying all of this gorgeous stuff here, but then if that's not the way that person runs their part of the business, I could be getting a real clash there. So I do think that we almost as recruiters have a responsibility here to really uncover the micro employee value proposition of a particular hiring manager.
Yeah, or that area. So if it's the finance area or the IT area, because ultimately, as a candidate, I want to know if that hiring manager leaves tomorrow, and I've been there where I've taken a job and during my keep warm period, the manager's gone, those values are still upheld by that area. And I think you're absolutely right where, what was percolating when you were talking was a lot of companies will say, you can apply for a job internally once you've been here a year, and if your performance rating is fine. But actually, it comes down to the managers and the leaders that you're working for, because some leaders will still want you to stay and keep hold of you. So you might get an internal role, but actually they make it so difficult for you to leave. They say you need to work 6 months notice, or you've got to wait till another person's been hired, that's why then it's often easier to go out externally and find another job, because you're only on that month's notice or 3 months. And what I'm saying is that goes back to the macro culture. Yes, we allow people to leave internally after 1 year. It shows how mobile we are, it shows how we support internal learning. But the reality when you're working for Joe Blogs is a different one. So again, goes back to that whole asking, questioning, being curious, talking to the hiring manager, talking to his team, seeing what type of, are the team supportive of that hiring? Are they sharing the content? What is it like to work for that individual? When you work with them, client side, it's really, when you join the call 2 minutes late because Zoom hasn't worked, have they been aggressive or have they been a bit shirty? Those kind of breadcrumbs are all things that you are, as a recruiting lead or recruiter, picking up on, I think, those signals.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, I've been in the recruitment industry for 24 years. There are absolutely companies out there who I wouldn't represent because what it's like to work there. You hear through the grapevine, you hear through conversations with candidates who are looking to leave what it's really like. And ethically, I couldn't, expect anyone to leave an organization to go and join somewhere like that. I think that's really, I think a lot of this stuff is probably quite unwritten and it's just known in the market. But I'm really conscious of time. I really want to ask you this because we love, Joe and I, to have this kind of practical step guide kind of vibe to our LinkedIn lives. And what practical steps can we take to create a credible EVP that adds real value versus becoming a kind of costly, superficial exercise? So I think, it's a nice to have. In order to kind of create kind of governance and cadence and credibility around an EVP, it needs to be done properly. But if you were sat in talent acquisition today thinking we really need one of these, what could you do?
And can I add another light to it?
No.
And if we were, the goal was to become more representative, right?
Yeah.
We were really thinking about this ED&I piece as well. So because I'm really keen to hear this, from an ED&I perspective as well.
So I think if I was sitting in TA and I hadn't got an EVP, you will have an employer brand because your employer brand exists whether you like it or not. It's, what do people perceive when I say the name, the company that I work for? Whether that's right or wrong, that's your employer brand. What we're thinking about is how do we really think about the reality and that articulation of what it's really like, and then we can nurture it and manage it and communicate it externally and internally, because you're right, it's as important for retention as it is for external attraction. So I think there's that whole, the practical actionable steps are starting inward first. So your test your assumptions. So talk to different types of individuals that have been at the business a long time, new starters, individuals that have been here in mid-period, the type of roles that you're looking for. So again, that you're trying to hire, really over-index on that. You want something practical. Don't spend all your time then talking to, a grade that actually you never hire and they're always hired internally. Think wisely about where you're spending your time. But again, try to replicate the kind of the organization that you're trying to look for in the future. So TA and the EVP, squad, working together. Okay, the types of individuals you talk to should replicate where we want to go. So I'll use this as an example. I worked at an organization where there's a massive area of defense in the business, about 80% of it, and actually they wanted more women. Not a surprise there. So actually I spent more of my time talking to the women that did work there, and they all talked to one thing. The way they messaged themselves and the photography was all very, very macho, tanks, army outfits, and so on and so forth. And so that's not the reality of why we're here. And changing that small thing made a real power, was a real powerful move. So the first thing is start talking to individuals individually without any hypos and testing those assumptions you've made. And then thinking really, really wisely about, okay, if we want to start messaging this and we have no budget, we're a lean team, we've been downsized, or our focus is on 15 different things, because everything's important, is, okay, what's our channels? The most effective channel now is around advocacy. So if you have no budget, because even on social, doing things organically without any budget is so damn hard. If you have got an inside out approach to your EVP, and we have, because we've talked to people, then actually those messages that you want to convey, asking your employees in the form of advocacy to share those, not a script. You don't want everyone to sound like a corporate clone, but if it is actually an environment where it is inclusive, Joe, or it is an environment where people have bought into the MD saying, I want this to be more inclusive, I want us to focus on having an environment that looks like the community we operate in, and these are the 5 things we're doing, and he's talked about it in a town hall, and she's talked about it in her weekly comms, and they all then feel free that they can talk about it on LinkedIn or the channel in their own words. That is the most, I hate using the word cost effective, but it is more cost effective because it feels authentic. It's definitely cheaper. And you have got individuals then building their personal brand. So that's, that's something in it for them. From an ED&I perspective, Joe, to your point, I am not a fan, nobody is on this call, of tokenism. So, I have been in environments where, you've got one woman in a particular leadership role, and suddenly she's showcased on the Sunday Times, on the website, on LinkedIn, on every award entry you possibly can. It's tiresome for the person involved. It's really fatiguing, and actually it feels disingenuous. So I think there is something around being really honest about why you want to showcase individuals internally, and giving individuals, and I've had this where people have gone, and it's been women in this case, I don't want to be part of that video. I don't want to be part of a testimonial because I'm always being asked, or actually I don't feel comfortable with what the message is being said, which again gets back to that root cause. The EVP is not built on credibility, it's built on a house of cards. So I think there's something around, finding the individuals that do want to get involved. I'm a massive advocate of building strong relationships with your employee resource groups if you've got them. If you don't have employee resource groups because you're a smaller enterprise or they don't exist in your current business, talk to individuals that are interested in actually building both their personal brand, but have been talking about the pain points of, why does our business look like this? Or why are we always going to the same universities? Why are we at Oxbridge and Durham, but actually some of our best talents come from Leicestershire or Birmingham and so on? I'm using it as a hypo. You will soon, if you're doing the listening that I've talked about, understand who those people are and say, actually explain, not once, not twice, but 3 times, you being representative on our website, you doing a LinkedIn live with me to talk about your career history at such and such business is going to have so much power. So again, Sally, to answer your question, it's the actionable steps are listening, articulating what people have said, and being distinctive. So don't be a rush to go out and say we're innovative and inclusive. Find what the secret sauce is. I'm not saying it's easy to find that out, and be bold, own it.
Fantastic. And I think we should probably also mention, Shari, you do this for a living. So, if you need any support, even if it's a kind of consultation, how do I, a roadmap, how do I get from A to B? What kind of things should I consider? Shari is here to help and to engage with on a kind of consultancy basis. So please do reach out, because I know that it's something that you're clearly very experienced and passionate about. But, this is the thing that so many companies get wrong. And actually, if they've got this bit right, and it is a journey, it's not like a one-stop shop, it is a journey. But if they can invest in this, suddenly their retention goes up, their attrition goes down. They start making a dent in, attracting underrepresented talent, opening up opportunities for underrepresented talent. And so I think having a more holistic view on it and thinking, actually, if we invest in our EVP and get some consultation to help with that, I think can really kind of accelerate progress.
Yeah, and I don't think you don't need to make this a monster of a program. There's real way of looking at this in a way that's agile. But yeah, thank you, Sally. I'm definitely looking for both a permanent role in this EVP recruitment marketing space, or certainly as a consultant. But it's really important work that we're doing, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. The whole inclusive diversity piece can feel a bit polarizing. In the UK, US, there's lots of interesting, challenging conversations going on, but I don't think we can ever run away with it. Businesses need to think about this carefully when it comes to attraction and retention, and mindfully. And I think all 3 of us look at this with different moments that matter across the employee experience. So really hope that people have had a good convo with us, but really happy to answer any questions outside of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Jo, I'm just really grateful that you and Charu met and introduced us, and we've been able to create this space to collaborate and and have this conversation. So eternally grateful to you always, Jo. Really, blessed to have met you, Charu. And it is fascinating, this subject. So I really hope we've been able to help some of our listeners. And we look forward to seeing you again, probably in 6 weeks' time. I don't know when our next one is, Jo. It's in my diary somewhere. Thank you. Oh, look, Jo, your little baby's come to say hello as well. Just had a little poke round. Exciting to see what happens with you, Jo, in terms of your new product launch. Having someone who's, inclusive recruitment trained. I have personally gone through Jo's program, and it's absolutely, exceptional. It's given me a lot of confidence in the recruitment space. I knew I was part of the problem. I was perpetuating this problem, and so it gave me the space to be able to really sit back and relearn and retrain how to do things properly. So and now I'm able to use all of the skills I've learned with my clients and having a positive impact. So so grateful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Have a lovely afternoon. Hopefully the sun is still shining out there. There's no windows in this office. But I look forward to seeing you both soon. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.